This is the March 15th, 2012 interview with Ruth Hawley, who is the granddaughter of William Allhands Lynch. And she is almost 92 years old, and she's going to talk about her memories of her uncles. And in this interview, we're talking about her uncle Ray, William Ray Linch. So, Ruth, what can you tell me about your Uncle Ray?
Well, he was the third, I believe, child, and he was a very bright child.
He was the third child of William Allhands Lynch and the second wife, Arvilla Lynch.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's the third child of the second marriage.
That's right. The third one.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was the third.
Yeah, it was.
And then, but he was. I really don't have much in his childhood. I heard very much. He was a very smart child, and he was smart enough to play his cards right and stay on the perimeter of his father's anger and mother's. I never heard much, but I'm sure he got his share of the. They didn't spare the rod and spoil the child with any of them. But they lived neighbor to the Dooling family, and he fell in love with belonged toward the middle of the family's daughters, and her name was Diva Dooling. Well, the Dooling, I won't get into details on it, but they were not particularly well thought of. I know there were two of the aunts.
Okay, so
two of her sisters were pregnant at the same time.
And they had a bit of a reputation.
They had a very questionable reputation, according to my grandfather's idea. And he probably, if there was anything skullduggery in the moral department afloat, he knew about it and was in on it. So, anyway, I remember them telling the story when Uncle Ray was out in the barn, and he told his father he was going to marry Diva Dooling. His father knocked him flat on his keister, and that's when he left home. That was...
How old was he?
Oh, I suppose early 20s. But they made a very good, and there was never a breath of scandal about Diva. And the Dooling family, I heard as a child different escapades that went on with Gilbert and so forth, and but it all faded out through the years, and I know Gilbert got in on a bit of unnecessary skullduggery when Uncle Ray was being sued for something about his insurance company that he was running, and him and Aunt Mabel and Clarence, and he joined their side of the force, and those were the two brothers and sisters that tried to create trouble for Uncle Ray, and he was in over his head with trouble from this investigation of his insurance company, and somehow or other they got into the act. I don't know whether it was trying to claim that their mother money was involved, and she didn't have anything really.
Diva's money.
Yeah. That'd be Arvilla's house, and there was that big building that Uncle Ray had his office in, and my father had his equipment for the lightning rod company was in there, and the building had been condemned, and my father was the one that hired the workers to go in there and build up to the state's requirements to keep the building from being condemned. And he was the only one that had, and he never ever asked for reimbursement for his money. It was in the thousands of dollars. And it was him that saved that building from getting condemned, that Clarence and Mabel and Gilbert were in on. Some underhanded work. Well, for years, Uncle Ray and Aunt Diva, they never had anything to do with Gilbert after that.
And Gilbert, who was Gilbert?
That would be Diva's younger brother.
Oh, Diva's brother. Okay.
Yeah, how he got in the act, I couldn't tell you, but he did, and he did something that he was supposed to testify or something, and he gave the wrong. He helped the opposing side and created. For years they had nothing to do with him, but then they made it up eventually. Well, anyway, they were. Ray was an entrepreneur and a astute businessman, and he was had the American hail insurance company, and he had a company down in Kansas that he wanted to promote my father as the false head of this uh, company, and he was well. He did come close to getting into serious trouble.
Who, Ray?
On this, yeah, because he hired a man that was a big name insurance. That see, my Ray didn't have any education. He was like my father. He was self-educated, really, and they learned. He had the same level as my father. He learned to read and write and figure a bit, and go to school only in the winter time, maybe a couple 3 months. That was the extent of the older kids' education. So now where was I?
About the thing down in Kansas with the hail insurance.
Well, he had my father. Well, then that trouble came along, and everything fell apart. And I remember Aunt Carrie telling my mother, "Well, don't feel bad that John was." Because he would have ended up taking the rap for Ray's stuff. And Aunt Carrie said, just be glad that he's not involved in any of it, and he's on his own. Because he'd be in trouble if it had gone the way they had mapped out for my dumb father. Because with his, he'd do just as he was asked. He was that easygoing and good-natured. And I remember Aunt Carrie down, "Stella, you just don't know how lucky you are that he can't be involved in it." So we all had an amusing time over that. But it was a fearful time because they had the headlines of the paper, the Hay Lynch's, and that they were acquitted. It came across the headlines of the paper. The Lincoln Journal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the top big headline
Okay.
about Lynch's being acquitted, and I know it was Lynch is acquitted, witness attacked. And that was another man who was in the business with Uncle Ray. That was Henry Thorpe, and Uncle Ray was he was just cornered. But he had enough brains and he had the money to hire good lawyers, and but Henry Thorpe was his head honcho of the business, and he testified against Uncle Ray because it was kind of a mixed up. And Henry had been active in government affairs. Henry Thorpe, he was one of those old time deals.
Yeah, keep talking.
And anyway, the headlines on the paper said, "Lynch is acquitted, witness attacked." Uncle Ray jumped up out of his seat in the courtroom and he smacked old Henry Thorpe, knocked him down. He hit him. He knocked him silly. So that made headlines. It was in the headlines in the paper for a long time. That was the biggie news of the Lincoln, Nebraska.
That was the big scandal going on.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it's like this man that he hired was the one that brought the police force in to find. He knew that there was liquor, which was prohibition, and the bottle of liquor was in the window down in the basement window that Lawrence would take a drink when he was practicing, and they had a fighting ring down there for him to practice, and he's the one that fought in Madison Square Garden. Well, DeLoss happened to be upstairs when the authorities arrived and walked in on him, and this man that Uncle Ray had hired to run his company, he was with him, and DeLoss went down and took the liquor. He went down on the elevator ahead of him because he knew that was the only thing that he could think of, because it was prohibition, and that one bottle of bootleg whiskey was in the wouldn't be more than maybe a teacup full in the bottle, but that's all it would take to close the company down.
And that was Ray's company.
That was Ray's company, and it was a very prosperous, thriving company, and that was
dealing with the hail insurance.
Yeah, but they could find fault. This man that came in, they brought in from New York, he was conniving for him to take the company over. Whether there really was anything in particular outside of things like having that bootleg small bottle of whiskey in the window ledge, only the one bottle. But that's what the only thing that the laws could think of that they could shut him down for. So he's the one that saved Uncle Ray's neck by running down and getting that bottle out of the building.
So when the police raided the building,
there
was nothing there. They didn't find anything.
He knew it. He was in there with him, working with him, and he knew that bootleg whiskey, and that's what he tried to shut him down for, was Uncle Ray having this bottle of whiskey. And the police force themselves, on Christmas Eve, they were all there getting juiced up on a Christmas Eve party that was open house for the police force. That happened several years that I knew about.
So they hung on to the company.
Huh?
Uncle Ray hung on to the company.
Yeah, and that it was a whether there really was anything, nobody ever knew anything about. It was a functioning, very prosperous company. Hail insurance, I know, and Uncle Harry had his hail insurance money come in because they got so much hail out where he lived, and he would get his pockets a little bit lined.
So Uncle Ray had he had the hail insurance company his whole life. That was his main business.
I don't remember. It seems to me he did, because no, he went into the lightning rod then, because he had my father's machinery. The company was my father's, and he had the machinery. Then he went into the the lightning rod world.
Oh, after the hail insurance.
That's right. The hail insurance. Henry Thorpe, his testimony, and of course people dropped. It was a scandal. Lost his clientele all over
after
the
that,
state.
After the scandal. So the scandal kind of ruined the company.
That kind of ruined it. But he had my father's machinery and the equipment to spin out the copper wiring, and it would roll up on the big rolls that they had to carry in the back end of their cars or their trucks for the salespeople to go out and string up the rods for people. And my father used that building. See, he was the one that saved the building from being condemned in the first place, and Uncle Ray had possession of it. And
so how old was Uncle Ray when he left the hail insurance company business and moved over? In his 30s or 40s?
No, about late 50s.
Oh,
when
late
he died.
50s.
But he was involved. Then Howard, his son, Howard took over.
Oh, okay.
And that's what I think he had that functioning. It was a going concern.
What was the name of the lightning rod company? Nebraska
The American Lightning Rod Company. And my father was the sole owner. This old man willed it to my father. And it was used in his mother's building for, that was one way of helping, I suppose, because to pay back for my father's expense of saving the building from being condemned.
I see.
He spent a lot of money on that deal.
So what kind
then that gave it a living.
Okay.
And Uncle Ray took over, and there was a lot of expense and office help and different things.
Okay. Who did Uncle Ray marry? Oh, Diva Dooley.
He married Diva Dooley.
And what about their kids?
They had 2 children. There was Howard and Marion. Howard was Russell's age. He was 9 months older than Russell. And Marion was about 2 years younger than I am. And there was nothing spectacular there. Howard married a girl from down south by the name of Irvine, and she was an only child, and she came from a very prosperous background. And Marion married a local fellow that went to the same school she went to. His name was John. I can't say John Bottorff.
Uh-huh.
That was her, and they had one child, Shirley.
Okay.
And she played with your brother, Doug. She was, and Marion lived in her father's home, and of course he'd made back enough. He wasn't exactly a poor man. Uncle Ray wasn't. Aunt Diva lived in that lovely home there in University Place, and Marion lived there with her husband, John, and John, he had problems being a provider. He was an easygoing, he liked the couch pretty well.
Okay.
And it's where nobody really thought much about it.
Marion and John, they had
Shirley.
Okay, Shirley. And what about Howard and Irvine?
Oh, they had 3 daughters.
Uh-huh. What were their names?
And, well, I remember, I can't remember their names now offhand. It'll come to me down the line.
Okay. Okay.
But they're your ages.
Okay.
You and Doug's.
Yeah, I remember meeting them, but I don't remember their names.
There was, I really can't remember, but they settled down in the south someplace.
Okay.
But I never heard much about.
Well, their names are on the list, so that's okay. We can look at them later. So, what memory do you have of Uncle Ray? You yourself?
Well, I'm sorry to say, and I never had any one way or the other, but Marion and I were talking, and as children do. I was about 8, and Marion would be 6, and we were in the living room, and they were trying to listen to the radio. They didn't have television, and Uncle Ray said, "Be quiet." Well, apparently I either disobeyed or I didn't hear him, and Marion and I, we toned down, but I was closer to Uncle Ray, and apparently we weren't quiet enough to shoot him, so he hauled off and hit me across the side of the head. And my father was there, and it was a heavy blow. I saw stars, and I was so crushed that I kept from crying, but it just made me dizzy.
What did your father do?
And Marion was the one that was doing the cutting up, but I was the one that got smacked on the side of the head. Well, that stopped any talking, and my father, he was just livid that he would dare to do such a thing right in front of him. But that was typical of their attitude toward Russell and me both. However, Russell was such a brilliant student, and he never drew attention to himself, that it was hard for them to run him down, but they took it out on me.
So what did your dad do when Uncle Ray hit you?
Well, he got up and walked out, and I told him he said we're going over to Grandma's house. Her backyard joined Uncle Ray's backyard. But if I had burst into tears, I don't know. I think he would have. He would, because before he had had run-ins with Ray's cruelty, and another thing, it plays over into the way the kids treat you when the parents are like that, and I was always in trouble with the school, this episode that as children, we were talking about smoking, And one kid, my mama smokes, another one, yeah, my mama, and I spoke up one time. I said, well, my mama smoked once on a bet. And I put that in there, and I remembered, because she didn't smoke, but she smoked once on a bet. Well, that's all I had to say, because the teacher had picked up on, she was close to the old lady that lived with my grandmother, and all of that was funneled into her, so she didn't like me. Miss Churchill, she was a very cruel teacher to me, and she'd ask questions of the little lessons. Well, I caught on that if I knew the answer, I kept still, I wouldn't raise my hand, and she kept pretending to keep little notes on that whether you knew the answers. Well, what I did, I wouldn't raise my hand, and then she'd call on me to catch me out. Well, then I did know the answer, and I gave the answer. Then she marked me down for being belligerent, and I mean I was that was only in the first grade.
Yeah, that's not nice. But anyway, let's get back to Ray, because
you see, that was played back from their way of treating Russell and me. The kids, I got blamed for stuff. Howard scratched my face with a toy broom in the little side swing, and I was just clawed with this broom, and that was him and Marion both had Shetland ponies, and they were allowed to ride those ponies at random wherever they wanted, and they tramped over people's yards and paid no more attention to it than it was their just dues. And I never once was allowed to get near that pony, even pet it, of Marion's. And they promoted that kind of treatment. So and then Marion was at our house one time when my friend that was a close friend of mine lived down the street. Her name was Mary Alexander, and so, anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so I can see that you had a lot of childhood issues with your cousins, and kids are like that.
It was.
But anyway, I think this.
Kid stuff.
Yeah, it's just kid stuff.
Nothing. We were in.
When you grew up, everything was fine.
I never was close. Really close in the heart.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think this is probably enough for Uncle Ray, and we'll move on to the next brother.